Good afternoon, dear.
Dobré odpoledne, vážení kolegové.
I would like to start our meeting.
Začneme nyní s naší schůzí, protože máme velice nabitý program dnes večer. Nejprve začneme naše zasedání hlasováním o zprávě o dohledu nad vnějšími mořskými hranicemi v kontextu operační spolupráce v rámci Evropské agentury pro operační spolupráci na vnějších hranicích členských států. Zpravodajem je pan Coelho. A potom od 19:30 budeme pokračovat s vyšetřováním výboru LIBE. Na minulé části tohoto vyšetřování byla plánována prezentace dokumentu pana Kirkhopa a pana Moraese a ta byla odložena. Takže pokud nemáte žádné námitky, tak pořad jednání je schválen. Tlumočnický režim pro dnešní zasedání je omezený vzhledem k velikosti této místnosti, takže nebude tlumočení do finštiny, dánštiny, chorvačtiny, malčtiny. Takže dám slovo panu zpravodaji Coelhovi před hlasováním. Chcete něco říci, prosím? Ano, jen velice krátce. Děkuji za spolupráci všem politickým stranám. Podařilo se nám najít kompromis mezi...
We are trying to underline a human approach. We want to save lives, but we also want to find a compromise with the Council. We realise the decision of the Court of Justice allow the Council's decision to still valid while we do not approve a new legal text, so we need to find an agreement with the Council in order to replace the Council decision with a new valid legal text. And that's what we are trying to do. And that's why I thank all the cooperation which allows our LIBE committee and myself as rapporteur to stand with a very strong support in the negotiations with the Council. Thank you so much.
I know. Thank you, Mr. Coelho, and let's continue. Let's start the vote.
Shall we go? I was looking for my glasses. Okay. We're going to be starting the vote. I'm so sorry.
Yes.
I'm so sorry. I was just on my way from the airport, rushing from the airport. Okay, we're getting started with the vote. I don't have my voting card, so I will be counting my vote until I have a moment to fetch my voting card from my own voting card. Let's get started. Amendment 71. Those in favor? Those against? Abstentions? Check. There is division even in the groups. Okay. Let's check. The vote is open. Now the vote is closed. Closed. Excuse me? Yours is in favor? Yes. So it's 15 against 23 with 10 abstentions. So it's rejected. Amendment 72. Favor. Against. Abstentions. Rejected. Amendment 8. Favor.
Against? Abstentions? Adopted. Amendment 9, favor? Against? Abstentions? Adopted. Amendment 73, favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Amendment 74, favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. 10, favor? Against? Abstentions? Adopted. That goes to AFET 8, favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Trang 6, favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. 78, split vote. First part, favor? Against? Abstentions? Adopted. Against? No, excuse me. Second part, favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Trang 7, favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Compromise 10, favor? Against? Abstentions? Adopted. Compromise 11, favor? Against? Abstentions? Adopted. AFET 11, favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Compromise 12, favor? Against? Abstentions? Adopted. Amendment. Really? Amendment 100. 2 pages ahead. 100. Favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Compromise 13. Favor? Against? Abstentions? Adopted. Compromise 14. 104. Favor? Against? Abstentions? Adopted. 105. Favor? Against? Abstentions? Adopted. Compromise 14. Favor? Against? Abstentions? Adopted. Compromise. Amendment 111. No, Tran 11. Tran 11. Favor? Against? Abstentions? Adopted. That's 110. And 110. Favor? Against? Abstentions? Adopted. 111. Favor? Against? Abstentions? Adopted. 112 are identical as the... I see. And Tran 12. Those are identical. Favor? Against? Abstentions? Adopted. AFET 13. Favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. AFET 113. Favor? Against? Abstentions? Adopted. AFET 14. Favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Tran 13. Favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. No, it's there. 115, if it's there, if it's to be voted, 115, favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Now, all in block from 116 to 137. Favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. 15. Compromise 15. Favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. No, adopted, excuse me. Now it goes to compromise 16. Favor? Against? Abstentions? Adopted. AFET 16. Favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. 134. Favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Compromise 17. No? You, would you like to check 134? 134 checking. Checking now. Now closed. 36 against, 16 plus, rejected. Now, what?
Next page.
19, favor. Against. Not clear. Favor. Against. Abstentions. Now clear. Favor, adopted. AFET 17, favor. Against. Abstentions. Rejected. Compromise 17. 136. 136 favor. Against. Abstentions. Rejected. Yes, it's rejected. Now 130. No, excuse me. Compromise 138 favor. Against. Again, I didn't see that clear. 138 favor. Against. Let's check. We're going to check on that because there are some abstentions. Let's going to check on 138. Now the vote is open. Closed. 17 against 24. It's rejected. 139 with oral amendment. Favor. Against. Abstentions. Adopted. Compromise 17. Favor. Against. Abstentions. Adopted. Compromise 18. Favor. Against. Abstentions. Adopted. 154. First part. Favor. Against. Abstentions. Adopted. Second part. Favor. Against. Abstentions. Rejected. 155. Favor. Against. Abstentions. Rejected. 22. Favor. Against. Abstentions. Adopted. 156. Favor. Against. Abstentions. Rejected. 23. Favor. Against. Abstentions. Adopted. 158. Favor. 157. I'm sorry. 157. Favor. Against. Abstentions. Adopted. 158. Favor. Huh? Against. Abstentions. Adopted. 159 and Tran 16, which are identical. Favor. Against. Abstentions. Adopted. 160. 160. Favor. Against. Abstentions. Adopted. 161. Favor. Against. Abstentions. Adopted. Tran 9. No. Yes. 162. Favor. Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Compromise 19. Tran 19. Favor. Tran 19. Tran 19. Favor. Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Compromise 19. Favor. Against? Abstentions? Adopted. We go to 180. 2 pages ahead. 187 and 202. Favor. Against. Abstentions rejected. 188. Favor. Against. Abstentions rejected. 189. Favor. Against. Abstentions adopted. 190. 91. 191. Favor. Against. Abstentions rejected. 24. Favor. Against. Abstentions adopted. Compromise. No. 25. Favor. Against. Abstentions adopted. Compromise 20. Favor. Against. Abstentions adopted. 192. No, 193. 193, are you sure? No.
Yes, I'm sure. I'm sure. 193.
No.
No?
Yes.
False?
Doesn't.
If amendments are adopted.
You were rejected.
It wasn't adopted. It was the third amendment.
What about this?
Those two, the compromise was adopted, so those two.
What about these ones?
This one.
193, favor. Against. Abstentions. I didn't see that clear. Let's check. 193. We're going to check on. Okay? We're going to check. 193. The vote is open. Now closed. 26 against 27. It's rejected. Pencil. 194. Favor. 195. Favor. Against. Abstentions. Rejected. 196. Favor. Against. Abstentions. Rejected. 27. 199 and 197. No. 198 and 199 go together. Favor. Against. Abstentions adopted. 197. False. Now. It's very confusing. This is very confusing. This is very confusing. Eh? This is very confusing. I mean, there are so many. I mean, I've got here 20 votes related to false amendment to 187 and 202. And some of them have fallen and some of them have not.
It's not fair, but because they do voting.
Okay. Okay. Now, 200. Favor. 200. 197. 197. Favor.
No, it falls because this one is.
It has fallen. I mean, some of them. I mean, I've got here in my voting list. I have 20 votes related to 187 and 202. Fallen. Fallen. Some of them have fallen. Some of them have not.
It's this condition that works for this one. This one.
Okay.
It was this one and it was adopted.
Okay. Now, 197 has fallen. Now let's go for 200. Favor. 200. Against. Abstentions. Rejected. 28. Favor. Against. Abstentions. Adopted. 201. favor, against, abstentions rejected. 20, favor, against, not clear this time. I think it's it's adopted, but let's check. Okay, let's check. Voting on 20. The vote is open. I think it's adopted, but we're gonna check the hands. Closed. Yeah, 31 against 23. It's okay. Adopted. Now 204, favor. Against, abstentions adopted. 205, favor. Against, abstentions adopted. 206, favor. Against, abstentions adopted. No. 31, citations and recitals. 31, favor. Against, abstentions adopted. Compromise 1, favor. Against, abstentions adopted. 34, favor. Against, abstentions rejected. 33, amendment 1. Amendment 1, favor. Against, abstentions adopted. 33, favor. Against, abstentions rejected. 35, favor. Against, abstentions adopted. AFET 1, favor. Against, abstentions rejected. AFET 2, favor. Against, abstentions rejected. 36, favor. Against, abstentions adopted. AFET 3, favor. Against, abstentions rejected. Compromise 2, favor. Against, abstentions adopted. 40, favor. Against, abstentions rejected. Compromise 3, favor. Against, abstentions adopted. Compromise 4, favor. Against, abstentions adopted. Compromise Tran 1, favor. Against, abstentions rejected. Now compromise amendment 3, favor. Against, abstentions adopted. Compromise 5, favor. Against, abstentions adopted. Compromise 6, favor. Against, abstentions adopted. 52, favor. 51, no, 51, yeah, 51. 51, favor. Against, abstentions adopted. Check. You want to check? Checking on 51. Checking on 51. Vote is open. Now the vote is closed. 28 against 25. Adopted. Now, Amendment 52. Favor. Against. Abstentions rejected. 53. Favor. Against, abstentions adopted. Compromise 7, favor. Against, abstentions adopted. 59, favor. Against. Checking. Not clear. Checking on 59. The vote is open. Now closed. 20 against 34, that is rejected. So that goes to 60, favor. Against. Checking again, not clear because there's division among the ranks. Let's go and check on 60. The vote is open. Now closed. 28 against 26. It's adopted. 60, favor. No, 61, excuse me. 61, favor. Against, abstentions, adopted. Trunk 4, favor. Against, abstentions, rejected. Compromise 8, favor. Against, abstentions, adopted. Trump 5, favor. Against, abstentions, rejected. Compromise 9, favor. Against, abstentions, adopted. 69 in favor. Against. Abstentions rejected. 70 in favor. Against. Abstentions adopted. AFET 7 favor. Against. Abstentions rejected. Now vote the text as modified. Voting. The vote is open now. Now closed. (36 against 8), 10 abstentions. Now voting on the mandate to open negotiations with the Council. The vote is open now. Electronic check. Vote is open. Now closed. There it goes. 49 against 1 negative, 4 abstentions. That's okay with Mr. Coelho's report. Thank you, Mr. Coelho. And I'm sorry about the confusing moments. Eh? I am, believe me. Sometimes it's easier than some others. Sorry. That is okay.
We suspend a few minutes because Mrs. Redding is here at 7:30.
We're suspending for a couple of minutes as Mrs. Redding is scheduled by 7:30. Excuse me, if you excuse me, it'll be a recess for 15 minutes, so that Mrs. Redding is scheduled by 7:30. She'll be here. Thank you for your patience. We thank you for your patience. Thank you for your patience and for your understanding. It's sharp 7:30. I will better get going. As Mrs. Reding is here, we thank her for that. We thank her for her presence, for the readiness to cooperate with this LIBE inquiry session, and, of course, for her most valuable time. I understand that he's here just for 1 hour. She's here just for 1 hour, so let's make the best use of it. We are here to attend the presentation by Vice President and Commissioner Reding on the Commission communications on the European Union, United States data flows, the functioning of U.S. safe harbor, and report of transatlantic group of experts and the state of the play on data protection package. We are to move on, informing us about these data flows adopted by the Commission last November 27th, 2013. U.S. safe harbor already been examined by the LIBE Committee inquiry during the meeting of 7th of October 2013, in which the committee had the opportunity to hear the testimony of national data protection authorities, European Data Protection Supervisor, and an independent consultant. The impact of the U.S. National Security Agency mass surveillance activities on the safe harbor is also addressed in this working document co-authored by our rapporteurs, Mr. Voss and Mr. Moraes. So, Vice President Reding, surely understand that this committee is interested in hearing our state of the play on data protection package after the, we should say, disappointing outcome of the last J Council of December the 6th. Mrs. Reding is also invited to refer to this report of the EU-US Transatlantic Expert Group on Data Protection and Mass Surveillance Activities, and will inform us about the next steps to follow. Mrs. Reding, thank you again for being here. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, President, and let me say that I am very much impressed by the work this inquiry committee has been doing since the NSA revelations this summer. You have welcomed an impressive number of speakers, and those are very valuable testimonies both for the Parliament and for the Commission. So I look forward to read all the conclusions that your rapporteur, Mr. Moraes, is preparing. Now, we all know that the Snowden revelations have affected trust in our transatlantic relationships. The Commission immediately took a firm stance, saying clearly that the mass surveillance is unacceptable. And we wrote, we meaning Commissioner Malmström and myself, to our US counterparts, asking a series of questions immediately. And then in June, we raised the issue at the EU-US Ministerial. And on the basis of this, a number of steps were taken to address our concerns. In June, the EU-US ad hoc working group on data protection was set up, and contacts at different levels with the US authorities, the US Congress and Senate intensified. You have been debriefed regularly about the work of the EU-US working group, and we have also had the opportunity to discuss our different contacts with US authorities. I do think that the joint work of the Parliament and the Commission has been very important. I still remember when we were in Washington at the same time, and I bumped into familiar faces in the corridors of the Congress. It was pleasant, of course, but it was efficient because we all gave the same message. And I think it was a real wake-up call for senators and members of Congress to hear that we were really serious about this, and they came back from their constituency having heard from their voters that they were not amused either, and that made a change. So both the constituencies and the presence of the Commissioner and the members of this Parliament, I think we made our concerns and expectations very clear to our US friends, and we made sure that the rights of the EU citizens were part of the debate in the US, which was not at all the case before, I must say. As we have made progress, the Commission felt the need not only to report to the European Parliament by speaking, but also to report more formally, and that is why we issued a communication. In the communication, we set out the challenges and risks following the revelation of the US intelligence collection programmes, and we make recommendations on how to address them and restore trust in the EU US data flows. We have also presented an analysis on the functioning of Safe Harbour and a report on the findings of the EU US Working Group on Data Protection. We prepared you a file with all these papers so that you can have them in a written format. So first, the EU-US Working Group. They were published, the findings of this working group, on the 27th of November. The group proved to be useful as the US authorities engaged with us on important issues. Now, I have to be very clear here, not all of our questions got a complete answer, and the report is very clear on this. We know little, for instance, about the use of some US legal bases on data collection, such as executive orders. We know little on the existence of other surveillance programmes, as well as the limitations applicable to those programmes. Many questions were answered. They are the raw material, the basis of the recommendations that the Commission has made. And I would like to draw 3 conclusions from the discussion. First, it has been confirmed that the American programmes exist and that their scope is very broad. We had a long discussion about the purpose of those programmes and the conditions under which data can be collected and processed under American law. Second, the conditions and safeguards which apply are discriminatory. They protect EU citizens only to a very limited extent. While there are procedures regarding the targeting and minimisation of data collection for US citizens, these procedures do not apply to EU citizens even when they have no connection with terrorism, crime or any other unlawful or dangerous activity. In addition, while US citizens benefit from constitutional protections, these do not apply to EU citizens not residing in the US. Third, while some judicial oversight exists, it is of little added value from the perspective of a European, because the orders of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, the FISA, are secret, and companies providing assistance are required to maintain secrecy. There are no avenues, judicial or administrative, for either EU or US data subjects to be informed whether their personal data is being collected or further processed, and there are no opportunities for individuals to obtain access, rectification, erasure of data, or administrative or judicial redress. While there are safeguard oversight mechanisms by the three branches of the US government, it is clear that they have loopholes. And you are aware of the internal US debates on this point, by the way. In any case, there is no judicial oversight at all on the collection of foreign intelligence outside the US, which is conducted under the sole competence of the executive branch. We have shared our concerns on several occasions with the US authorities at the highest level, most recently at the EU-US Justice and Home Affairs Ministerial on 18 November in Washington, and I am sure you saw the strong joint press statement that was issued. Attorney General Holder and I had a frank discussion. He recognised that trust in the transatlantic relationship has been negatively affected. I explained what should be done to rebuild this trust and protect the rights of the EU citizens. For the first time, it became clear, not only informally but formally, that the reforms to come in the United States will see not only a link to the rights of the American citizens, but also a link to the rights of the European citizens. These steps are set out in the communication of 27 November. Its aim is to define policy objectives through which we would protect the rights of citizens and of businesses in the context of transatlantic data exchanges, and 4 points stand out. First, we need a swift adoption of the data protection reform, because only if we do have a strong legislative European framework with clear rules that are enforceable also in situations when data is transferred and processed abroad, it would provide the legal certainty and protection for European data subjects and companies which is needed. And I would like to thank your committee, President, because you have done your homework. And I would hope that the Council would also do its homework. But you have heard that I was not very diplomatic last week, saying that unfortunately the Council seems to be in deep hibernation and even going a step backwards. Well, I was kind of upset, I must say, and I voiced this very clearly. I hope that together we can exercise the pressure on the Council to accelerate its work. I said clearly that I hope that the Greek presidency, by taking over, will, in other words, continue where the Irish presidency had stopped in summer. Let's hope that this can be done. Secondly, safe harbour. In one sentence, we must make safe harbour safer. As requested by the European Parliament, we have analysed the safe harbour regime. And on the basis of the work of the ad hoc group and our discussions with European businesses, we have identified deficiencies, and we have made 13 very concrete recommendations. They relate to all aspects of the scheme: transparency, redress, enforcement and access for national security purposes. 13 ways to improve the functioning of safe harbour. Now the authorities which apply the rules of the US side have to deliver. What the US have received is a to-do list, and it is for them to recognise the seriousness of our concerns and to act Remedies should be identified by summer 2014 on the 13 points. We will then review the functioning of the safe harbour scheme based on the implementation of the 13 recommendations. Thirdly, we have to agree on strong data protection rules in the law enforcement context. You know what I am speaking about here. The umbrella agreement on data protection in the field of police and judicial cooperation, which I am negotiating since 2 years. This agreement must guarantee a high level of protection for citizens who should benefit from the same rights on both sides of the Atlantic. Notably, and I come back to what I said already in the beginning, and which became very clear after the analysis of the ad hoc group, EU citizens not resident in the US which do not benefit from judicial redress mechanisms should benefit from those. Now, that is the last stumbling block in our negotiations, because after these 2 years we have managed nearly to find an agreement on everything. There is nitty-gritty to be done. But what is left over, and where we did not find any agreement, is on the judicial redress mechanisms for European citizens not resident in the United States. We have been told always that it was not possible for this to be done because the Congress needs to change the law and the Congress does not want to change the law. Well, at the EU-US Ministerial, I have received from our US partners a political commitment to address the legitimate concerns of the EU citizen for effective redress. These should be similar to those available for US citizens or for persons residing in the US. It is the first time that this opening was made, and this opening was made after the meetings the parliamentarians and the commissioner had in the Congress 2 weeks before the ministerial. So this concentrated action which we had launched on the Congress, I think, had some had some results. In addition, the US administration should also commit to, as a general principle, making use of the formal channels of cooperation, because those exist. We do have a mutual legal assistance agreement between the United States and the European Union. Just it is not used as it should be used. In the future, that should be the channel of cooperation in order, and asking for data held by private companies located in the EU directly, as it is happening now continuously, should only be possible under clearly defined, very exceptional and judicially reviewable situations. And fourthly, and I'm always coming back to the same questions, but these questions have to be solved in different instances. So the US reform process. You know that the US Congress is discussing the right balance between security and privacy in surveillance programmes, and that the ministerial Attorney General Holder described the concerns among EU citizens and businesses about data protection. A profound debate has started in the US. That is completely new, because there was no debate in the US before. And to my humble opinion, it was the story with the handy of Madame Merkel which launched the real debate in the general public opinion in the United States. So we should nurture this debate and make sure that the concerns of EU citizens are also taken into account, that not in the end it is only the concerns of the American citizens, because they have started to raise concerns which are taken into account. And we should also make the case to US business representatives in Brussels, because in the US businesses and their interests are very important. Politicians pay attention to them, and businesses have spoken out for more transparency. I see a movement in the direction of ensuring stronger privacy safeguards, as without trust of their customers, US companies can lose a lot of revenue and competitiveness. I have written to Attorney General Holder asking the US administration to turn the nice words, which were not only said in the ministerial but also publicly in a press conference by Attorney General Eric Holder, that these words should be put into action. So, members of Parliament, since the first story broke, the Commission has been very proactive. It has made its voice heard. It has asked difficult questions, has defended the rights of the citizens, and now there are ways in which the trust in data flows between the EU and the US can be rebuilt. The past months have shown that when the EU speaks with a single voice, it is heard. So thank you for that. Thank you for being very proactive. And actually we have done in October what the Americans are doing all the time. They are coming to our parliament in order to lobby. Now we have been to their parliament in order to lobby, and that was the right way to proceed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Play, which gives us ground to opening the questions and answer sessions. As usual, we're going to first open a round of questions and answers from the rapporteur, Mr. Moraes, and shadow rapporteurs with the order. So please, Mr. Moraes, open up this first round of specific questions to Commissioner Reding, minding the timing all the time, because we must have in mind that Mrs. Reding should be leaving by 8:30. So please have it in mind, all of you. I've got a short list of speakers willing to take the floor, so I urge you this time to refrain the best possible to the timing which is scheduled. Mr. Moraes.
Okay. That means, Commissioner Reding, I have to dispense with all the thank yous and all the crawling, so I have to stop all that. But suffice to say that I think our delegation, I mean, we didn't have formal meetings when you were there and when we were there in October, but we had the same principles in mind. We were representing EU citizens and the business community and NGOs, and we, I think, said the same things, built the same relationships with Congress, and I think it was very effective. So that's enough on that question, but I think we could say something about that, but because of time, I think that's enough on that question. Could I thank you for coming here and just concentrate perhaps on the work that is to be done, which is really on the data protection package and safe harbour and some of these very difficult issues which are now left for us. First of all, on safe harbour. When we were in Washington, we had meetings with the Department of Commerce and the Federal Trade Commission, and our members raised to the Department of Commerce and the FTC the same concerns that you outlined in your 13 recommendations. Now, the Federal Trade Commission admitted that the safe harbour viewed to make the alternative dispute resolution systems free and not subject to the payment of fees, and also better ensure that non-compliant companies would be delisted. Could I ask you to comment on how you feel you could enforce the recommendations and how enforceable these recommendations are going to be in the light of that? And what steps do you think you can take if none of the requirements are going to be met? I mean, just a sense of that. And what is your view on the possibility of suspension? My colleague Axel Voss has made this a central part of his working document within the working documents we have for the conclusion of our inquiry in February when it goes to plenary. Secondly, on the data protection regulation, which of course Jan Albrecht, has he gone? Where's he gone? Is he still here? He will go into it in more detail. Can I just give the headline on this? Of course it's been delayed, and I just want to ask you what you think about what the necessary steps to ensure that within this delay and this difficulty with Council, how you think the revision of Safe Harbour is going to be achieved, or at least started in 2014, how you see this strategy. Give us some sense of where this is going to go, because we are again faced within this inquiry to make it a credible set of conclusions. We want to give a sense of direction to the Parliament as to where we're going to go from February onwards, and then into the election and beyond the election. This is quite important to us. So I'm going to leave it there just on these two issues, because I know my colleagues will want to go into more detail on their specific areas.
Thank you, Mr. Moraes. Mrs. Reding.
Should I answer once? Yes.
Yes, I mean, this is the way we use it here.
Okay.
Actually, I mean, the routine we followed is one by one. Okay. But if you prefer, in order to sum up with time, let's go for the shadow rapporteurs, and then the rest of the members. Okay, then let's go for the shadows. Mr. Voss, you go first.
So, ich möchte mich auch recht herzlich bedanken, dass die
I'd like to say thank you very much to the Commission for taking this subject of NSA and data protection seriously and going on the offensive. I think that's good, and there needs to be more of it, particularly from the side of the Council. We're all clear about that. But at the moment, it doesn't look like we're going to manage to get that during this Parliament. At the moment, we see the danger for our citizens at two levels. Firstly, through bugging, perhaps illegal bugging by the NSA, and secondly, not being bugged but being spied on, and secondly, this deep analysis of the private behaviour of individuals, which who then have an obligation under US legislation to provide data. So I think it's good that the convention is being assessed. The recommendations are good, but my conclusion is a rather different one. I can't see that through the recommendations we're going to be able to do much to regain the trust of our citizens. I get the impression we have to take a step further. It's not just a question of suspending something for a period. I would say we have to renounce it. Trust through the justified actions of the Commission will not be reinstated because we don't have control of the whole procedure. We're not in a position to protect our citizens more effectively. I would say we have to renounce this agreement. We have to go into new negotiations on a shared basis. That's something that is being attempted. But this also, with respect to the fact that there has to be legal protection provided for our citizens, and also that we should perhaps be certifying the American companies ourselves, because then we'll have more control. We've got the standards on the basis of which we do things here. We can impose them on them and check they're being complied with. And I think that that will do far more to regain the citizens' trust than leaving things still in the hands of the Department of Commerce. Particularly since, I don't know, and I'll ask this, I don't know whether the recommendations that are being given would be binding in nature, and how they could be evaluated, and whether they are in fact sufficient. So I would be in favour of withdrawing from the convention, setting it up setting up a new version on the basis of proper data protection standards, because I do get the impression that we won't get this loss of trust on the part of the citizens and this deep intervention into their data without doing things that way.
Mrs. Intveld goes first. Mrs. Intveld.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Commissioner, for your statement and your efforts. I have a few questions, though, because it's all very well that we, after all the revelations, we entered into dialogue with the Americans. But I still have the feeling, and I've said it before, that's asking the perpetrator to admit that he's done something that he didn't want to admit in the first place. So I think that we need to rely much more on ourselves than dialogue with people who clearly do not respect our laws. This is not about what the US do to us. This is about getting our own house in order and asking ourselves why it has been possible in the first place that the US have done something like this or are doing something like this to our citizens, and indeed other countries as well. Why have we been unable to protect and safeguard the rights and the privacy of our citizens? Now, we will restore the trust not by talking to the American government, but to ensure our citizens that they are safe, that we will protect their rights. I have a few concrete questions. First of all, we've been talking a lot about the US and what they've been up to. I mean, the picture is pretty clear there. But what has the European Commission done about the allegations of snooping on citizens by our own EU governments? Because we may not be safe from the Americans, reading our emails and listening into our phone calls, but we're not safe from our own governments either. So what has the Commission done there? What has the Commission done about other governments who clearly intend, I mean, probably all governments want to do it, but some have more means than others. What about the Russian government, which has set up a system called SORM, which has recently been strengthened, which by some media was described as PRISM on steroids? I've asked the Commission this several times, and not you personally, Commissioner, but we've addressed questions to the Commission about this, and I've seen preciously little response. I would like to know. Everybody's talking about the Olympics now, and the Russians are taking more and more and more measures, snooping on their own citizens and on people outside Russia, and they don't seem to care very much. And apparently they don't have to care because nobody is reacting. Same incidentally goes for Russians collecting PNR data. I would also like to know why, against the backdrop of everything, why the European Commission continues to basically sabotage a strong transparency regulation, which is the counterweight against government spying on citizens. We need access to information, we need transparency, we need access to documents. And you know very well that I've got several court cases pending, and I've got a case before or several cases before the Ombudsman. Why do we have to go at such great length to get access to information which is really not top secret? Because when the documents are finally released, they turn out to be pretty innocent, frankly. Why does the Commission continue to block this? What will the Commission do to finally respond to the resolution of this House of 2 years ago, authored by myself, calling for a thorough evaluation of counter-terrorism policies? Because many of the questions that we are discussing now have been addressed in that resolution, and we asked the Commission and the Council to do a thorough evaluation. So those are the questions that I would like to put to you at this stage. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Now Mr. Albrecht.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for being here with us and summing up the state of the negotiations with the US and also the work in the EU-US expert group, which I thought a little bit that this expert group has not really found very many conclusions, so perhaps we have to search for our own conclusions as the European Union, and there you rightly point on our own data protection reform, and I would like to start with that, asking about the recent negotiations in the Council last week, because we as European Parliament really did a quite tremendous effort to get our position voted in October with a large majority here in this House on both files, the regulation and the directive, with really the effort to get this done before the elections, to give the citizens in the European Union something to be protected in this environment. And I'm really disappointed about the negotiations in the Council, and I would like to know about the arguments of those member states who had problems finding a common solution, a common ground, and especially the position and the arguments of the German minister would be very interesting for me, as I think Angela Merkel pointed out very rightfully already in summer that we need to accelerate the negotiations. The second question is on the next steps on the Safe Harbour Agreement or the Safe Harbour Declaration, because it's in the Commission's hands now to go ahead with drawing consequences on Safe Harbour. We don't need to agree to have the agreement by the US on it. So I just would like to know once more what exactly are the next steps and what is the timeline somehow for us to look at the process. And I agree with those pointing out, especially Axel Voss, pointing out that we really need now to take our own decisions on it, because it's about also the question how to bring it into order with our approach on a market regulation, like we would like to do it with the regulation, with the data protection regulation. And the last question is referring to the bilateral agreements of member states vis-à-vis this surveillance issues now, because I don't think that this is really an approach which we as the European Union should take now, that we try to get involved bilaterally with the United States. So I would like to know if there will be also somehow forums, at least, for debate between member states, EU institutions on the question how we approach the relations with the US, because if there are always going in parallel negotiators to Washington doing no spy agreements or whatever agreements, I don't think that this is an appropriate approach of the European Union, and perhaps we should debate also about the way how we deal with this. I think we work together in foreign relations. The Commission is also competent for foreign relations. We have a coordination when it comes to intelligence, and so why do we undermine that now with national approaches? I don't see that this is very helpful. And of course, what Sophie in 't Veld said on the question, what do we do vis-à-vis our own member state surveillance measures? I think the question still is in the air. Are these measures all covered by the notion of national security? I really think we need to scrutinize the scope of national security.
Thank you, Mr. Albrecht. The other two shadow rapporteurs are not seen here, Frau Ernst and Mr. Kirkhope. So we turn back to our Commissioner Reding to respond to questions that have been made by rapporteur and shadow rapporteurs, and then open second round of questions. Please try to be concise.
Mr. President, thank you also for the members who are recognizing that the joint venture in Washington was efficient. It was. Safe Harbour. Of course, I have seen, when I was in the States, FTC and the Department of Commerce. They were not very conscious about what was going on. They thought it would be a round of talks, and that would be. They never expected that we would come with a solid review of Safe Harbour, putting 13 elements of a to-do list on the table. Now, this to-do list goes rather far. You have the papers, by the way, in your files, so you can look at those. On transparency, because many companies, we have the impression, just utilise Safe Harbour as paravent. How you say that? As a yeah, okay, everybody understands what I mean. Without really implementing those rules in real terms. That means they have the stamp, Safe Harbour, and that's it. And nobody really controls if behind this stamp there is a certain behaviour. There I do understand what the members of parliament say, that it might be maybe better if we would do the control rather than the Americans in the FTC. On our enforcement recommendations, we foresee a greater role of the EU data protection authorities. That will give us more control. But and then on the access by the US authorities on the redress, all this is very clearly defined. You have the papers. I do not need to repeat those, but I have gone rather far. Not everybody likes that, I must tell you. I had really to fight to go as far as I did with the certain recommendations. Now, Safe Harbour, and I would like to say that to Mr. Voss, is not a negotiation between the European Union and the US. It is a Commission decision. It's not an agreement. So it has not to be negotiated. So these recommendations are a to-do list. They are not a basis for negotiations. We say sine qua non. If you don't do this, then we will come back to our Safe Harbour decision. Now, you should know also that although, and I have spoken with the European companies, although a number of European companies are very unhappy with the way Safe Harbour works, because they think it is just not fair that they need to implement the rules and some others don't. They nevertheless, and that is, I would like to say, 95% of the European companies say we need Safe Harbour, but we need it to work, to be implemented, to be controlled. But to eliminate it would not be a good idea. And that is also the reason why, to make it work and to control that it is work, that it is implemented, that's exactly what the Commission has now put on the table as a to-do list for our American counterparts, and then we'll have to take a decision. If they don't deliver on this, we will have to take a decision if we continue or not with Safe Harbour. But the ideal situation would be to continue with a Safe Harbour which could really be implemented and controlled. For this to really happen, I do believe that it will be important to have our data protection reform, because that gives also much more power on the basis of a common, of one only law for the whole European Union. It gives teeth to our data protection authorities. What they can do today, even in the member states where they are stronger than in others, well, not much, because the sanctions they can give are very low. And I mean, the sanctions are ridiculous. And that is why you said 5% of worldwide turnover. I say 2%. Well, that is a question of discussion. But that would give teeth to the data protection authorities in order to implement the rules also. So, you see, all these elements are linked one with the other, and that is why I was so disappointed, if not say more, when the Council was really going a step back and tried even the trick to declare after 2 years of discussion that the legal base would not be the correct one. Fortunately, there was also the Commission legal service who took the floor. By the way, it seems this was the first time in history that this happened. Well, I made it happen. So at least this is now gone. But many of the ministers took advantage of this in order to say, you see, we need to discuss more. Let's organise another discussion group and so on and so forth. Now, I don't want any other discussion because we have discussed it top down, left, right, all the time. We have asked about the German minister. Well, the German minister was not present on Friday, as usual. He was busy with doing this, the destruction of the free movement thing with the British Minister of the Interior, and had no time for data protection. Okay, I'm still upset, you understand? Because really, the first 6 months under the Irish presidency, things have advanced rather well. And last October, on the one-stop shop, we were very near to a decision, to a political decision on this one, and then things have gone topsy-turvy and completely backwards. So that was very negative, I must say. The positive element is that the Greek minister made it very clear that data protection would be one of his priorities. And so he wants to start already with an informal ministerial in January, which could help in that respect. But fortunately, I have managed to block this legal basis question. Came out of the blue, completely out of the blue. But you see what forces are working in order to not to come to a conclusion. And you need a presidency which wants it, and which is not under the influence of other forces in order to go ahead with this one. So let's help our Greek presidency to have to go ahead on this. There could be a political agreement in March. It is absolutely possible because things have been discussed in long and in large, all of them. And we do not need unanimity in Council. But if you have a presidency which just listens to those minorities which do not want any law for obvious reasons, then of course you cannot advance. If you have a presidency which goes with a huge majority in the Council, then you can make it. So it depends on the way a presidency acts on this. I think I already answered on. Sorry, no, I have not answered on everything. You will have a problem with Madame Dinfeld if I don't answer questions. I will not have, but you will have. So I protect you now, President. So according to the treaties, national security falls in principle under the sole responsibility of Member States, Article 4 of the treaties. So we have no competence to monitor the compliance with EU law processing of personal data exclusively carried out for national security purposes. However, it follows notably from the case law of the European Court of Justice that national security is not an unqualified and limitless concept. As any derogation, it has to be interpreted strictly and cannot be abused to escape compliance with EU laws. So that is the legal situation. Of course, when I write to the British government on the question of the Tempora programme, and I addressed 2 letters to the British government, I get a long explanation why what I have just said before and the European Court of Justice case law is not as it is. As long as, under our treaties, member states are in charge of intelligence services, military, their national security, we, the Union's institutions, will be weak. And I have always been in favour of a strong unified European voice, including military and intelligence matters. But in some way, to go until there, it will be very, very, very difficult. And we need a political union in order to arrive at that level. On Russia, I think I gave you the answer on Great Britain, on tempora. On Russia, it is more Commissioner Malmström's responsibility, PNR. You have heard what she says on PNR. Well, that is her responsibility. I did not go to the same way on safe harbour. But I will certainly also not go to Sochi. So, because there are not only the problems of data protection, there are also many problems of minorities and so on and so forth. The relations between Russia are in the hands of the High Representative also. Don't forget that. So I think that I gave the answers to our rapporteur. Unfortunately, on the answer on the bilaterals, on the no spy agreements and whatever, it goes with the answer which I gave before, and we will be in a very big conflict with member states who do not recognise the case law of the European Court of Justice, and it will be for the Commission on these questions extraordinarily difficult to go to court and to win in front of court. That makes the whole internal security, national security questions difficult to handle.
Thank you, Mrs. Reding. You've done our best, as usual. Believe me, to many of us, the more we get to know about you, the more we appreciate your refined political perception. So it's about time that we proceed to the second round. And I urge, I got a list of at least 7 members I see, to stick to 1 minute and a half so that Mrs. Reding can make it in time to provide answers. Please try to make real short, specific questions. We'll get started by Mr. Picker. Herr Picker, seine Welt.
Danke, Herr Vorsitzender. Auch herzlichen Dank an...
Thank you, Chairman. I would also like to thank Viviane Reding for her endeavours. I do think you have actually managed to change some aspects of relations. And I know that some American companies, Mark Zuckerberg to mention just one, have made it clear that they find what the US has been doing unacceptable. However, as far as it comes to practical steps which can be taken in terms of this agreement, I think that Europe is still very vulnerable and we have to try to do something proactive. So a couple of suggestions. I'd like to know to what extent the Commission would agree with this and can support it. First of all, the problem is that we seem to be setting up our alarms once the burglars have made it into the house. our technology in the European Union isn't up to the same standards as that which seems to prevail in other states, including the United States. So this is why I think it's so important to recognise that US law has made it possible for them just to suck up all this information. We have no control over that. Our target, our objective must be to ensure that we support the European IT industry, and I think the Commission should lead in this. So I think we really should considerably step up investment so as to ensure that we have our own players in this area. We have to ensure that we have our own reserve. The speaker has to speak into his microphone. The interpreters can't work with a microphone in this position. I'm sorry.
Dass wir den Wirtschaftsstandort Europa zu schützen haben. Wir sind
Please ask the speaker to put his microphone up and speak into it.
suchen gemäß. Sorry.
Thank you very much. We all know that security services are clearly part of national powers or competences. What we need is some kind of Europol-like organisation whose task would be to fight counter-espionage operations with a view to presenting our industry, our research institutes and all the rest of it against attacks and interventions from outside, either the US or the Russians or anybody else. The speaker is touching his microphone again. This means that anything has to be done on a multilateral basis under the control of the member states. This is the suggestion I'd like to make to the Commission as a transitional phase, if you like, before taking this up to the fully European level.
Seven members willing to make points. If all of them use 3 minutes, it'll be 21, and then Mrs. Reding to respond. Please try to help us. Please try to stick to 1 minute and a half. Señora Romero López.
Gracias, Presidente. Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mrs. Reding, for having joined us today. You told us in your comments that the framework agreement of cooperation in the police and judicial area isn't being used or implemented for the time being. I find this surprising. When this agreement was first adopted, we knew that police and judicial systems differed enormously on the two sides of the Atlantic. And I think it was predictable that something along the lines of what's happened could actually happen. So given the fact that we have police and judicial systems are so fundamentally different, and the American state has in effect created this umbrella to protect them from things which we deem to be illegal. So the fact is, our agreement with them, our cooperation is now obsolete. And I would be grateful if you could tell us what we can do now. This was supposed to be a framework agreement encompassing a whole series of safeguards preventing just the things which we've been talking about happening.
It's yours, 1 minute and a half.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I wanted to ask Mrs. Reding, in the communication on rebuilding trust in transatlantic data flows, you talk about how the negotiations on the law enforcement data protection agreement provide an opportunity to clarify that personal data held by companies located in the EU will be accessed, will not be accessed outside formal channels such as the MLA or the sectoral agreements, except in exceptional defined situations. And then later you say commitments should be sought from the US administration along those lines. How close are you to, sorry, I'm doing the same thing. How close are you actually to getting such commitments? Because I noticed that the joint press statement of the 18th of November says there were also discussions on the need to clarify that personal data held by private entities in the territory of the other party will not be accessed by law enforcement agencies outside of legally authorised channels. Now that can be in this case, for instance, US legally authorised channels, not agreed legal channels. So it sounds as if there is still a very large gap there. Am I correct?
Thank you. Thank you. Mrs. Gomez.
Commissioner, Vice President, thank you for your somber outlook, which we share. Since Safe Harbour is a decision of the Commission, do you intend, having identified these recommendations, the things that are needed to be addressed, would you consider taking a bold decision by the Commission if they are not addressed, to see if you wake up this hibernating European Council? And will you actually, what could be done about TFTP? The Parliament also asked you to consider suspending TFTP. Now, on the question of the judicial redress, I was really struck in the US in our contacts because we had very divergent views from in the Congress, people saying you can't touch that. In the State Department, people telling us you can't touch that. But actually in the NSC, the National Security Council, the White House, a very different attitude. Actually, it was stated that they wanted to learn with us. They wanted to reach out at us. And the specific questions about judicial redress were not at all put off the table. So I have, as you have, indeed, the perception that if we speak with one voice, united, and if we speak at all, and the Council speaks, things can be heard in the other side of the Atlantic, and that could be a real negotiation. But if the Council continues to hibernate, nothing happens. So how do we wake up the Council?
Thanks, Chair. First, a question of a general nature. Does the Commissioner think that Mr. Snowden did a service to mankind, or do you think that he broke the oath of secrecy and therefore is an ordinary criminal? Second question, what Mr. Pirker already said. Isn't it a bit strange that we give almost under all kinds of agreements unlimited data to the United States, which they can at their own volition they can analyze? Why isn't it time to develop as quickly as possible some kind of an European data center in which all the data that we at the moment give to any other power, be it the United States, are amalgamated and at the request are given to the person that asked them?
Now, Mr. Onorevole Borghezio.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Chairman. A few brief questions. Has the Commission obtained information from the Member States most directly concerned by this, from the services of those states? Certainly, they have had information about those. By the 12th, between the 12th of December last year and January this year, they collected more than 55 million metadata from telephones, another 4 million data per day over a period which is not by chance, because it was the government crisis period in Italy. This demonstrates the type of activity that was targeted at a member state. So I think that it's quite right that the Commission has opened attempts at dialogue with the US, and I think you should depth on this situation, because in the major Italian press that we've published photographs of the superstructures photographed from the roof of the US Embassy in Rome, I think that if it can reach the press like that, it surely can reach the European institutions. We need to see from this very specific data what is being asked for. These are very specific data that are being asked for, and I want to know more about that.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner, you gave us a good description of ongoing developments in your view and the state of relations on both sides of the Atlantic, the extent to which this problem is actually being viewed as one in the United States. The idea being that citizens on respective sides of the Atlantic shouldn't be subjected to entirely different behaviour. So in the light of ongoing work and the measures which have been taken, I'd like to know whether you think that these measures will be enough to restore damaged trust, or even more importantly, whether these measures will allow us to establish a new basis to underpin the exchange of data with our friends in the United States. I just wonder whether these negotiations might not be overshadowed by the enormous military and economic implications. And I wonder if the dynamics inherent in those interests might not simply push these negotiations aside. So I think that what we've just been talking about now is a mere puff of wind. What we really need is a storm to get things going in the right direction. So perhaps the Commission will take the measures which are required to generate such a storm. I think it really is important that we move towards a satisfactory response to these problems.
It is true that we need the data protection reform because it will be our way of preserving ourselves and have enough force in order to protect also our companies. Force which we unfortunately do not have today because under the American law the American services have the possibility to ask information from American companies, and then they prefer to be against the European laws rather than to displease the Americans. And yes, it would be very important that we create a competitive advantage in building up our own systems instead of relying on the systems of other continents. And I do believe that there has been a wake-up call with the Snowden revelations, and that is also my response to Mr. Mulder, because I think it is irrelevant to have this philosophical debate about service to mankind or criminal. Was a wake-up call which is very useful for us to go ahead, but it seems that some member states do not want to hear this wake-up call, and that makes it rather difficult. Data protection, if we manage to get this strongly in Europe, that will be a golden standard. And it will be a golden standard and an advantage for our companies, because people have been very destabilised, citizens, and they will go for the companies which can protect them. So the first companies already go out in Europe with saying that data is safe within my technology. It is a technology which is stocked in Europe. So it is a selling argument. We should go more to this direction, most of all on the question of cloud computing. I just advise you to have a look at our cloud computing communication. We should prefer services which are based in Europe. That is going to come. And American intelligence has analysed that on the basis of this whole question, the American cloud computing businesses are in the next 3 years going to lose between 24 and 32 billion dollars because of non-confidence in these systems anymore. Of course, Madame Romero, the systems are quite different, and also the perception of why data protection is important. But things have started to change, and our colleagues have observed the same way as I have observed that this is changing. Now, I got during 2 years, and I could have signed this umbrella agreement very quickly had I just abandoned the idea of equal treatment of European citizens and American citizens. The umbrella agreement is ready. It's only this thing which is missing, and I thought I had amended by the Parliament. Sine qua non, not to sign if this judicial redress is not included, and I see a lot of heads nodding. That is what Parliament has asked, and that is why I didn't sign so far. It's the first time, and that is my answer also to Madame Ludford, it's the first time that our American counterparts go for the possibility of changing the law. Because before it was not possible to change the law. But when we started to speak with members of the Congress, they said they had never been asked to change the law. And that was the answer we got from members of the Congress, both of the Republicans and of the Democrats. So it was not only one side. They said, well, nobody has ever asked us to change the law. And why not? It's not a big thing. It's really not a big thing to be done. But now the members know that it is important for us. The government knows that it is public, that it is important for us, and we need to continue to work on this. And if I say we, I mean the Parliament and the Commission. I do not expect a united help from the Council on this, because I see how the Council is working on, for instance, on the data protection file. So this is it's rather disappointing, I must say. What is less disappointing is that, because of what I said as an answer to Mr. Pirker probably, you might have seen today that 7 major internet firms made a specific request in the United States to change the law, because they start to feel the business damage which the distrust is bringing to them very clearly. On the Italian question, I can only say that these are the kind of problems which should be taken in hand by the Italian government. And on the SWIFT agreement, are we going to suspend it? I think you got the answer of Madame Malmström. It is in her responsibility. PNR and SWIFT are not in my responsibility. Safe harbour is in my responsibility. And as for the trade agreement, we made it very clear also that no, we do not want data protection to be part of the trade agreement, because there is nothing to negotiate. Data protection is a fundamental right. You don't start to negotiate fundamental rights. And we do have, this is inscribed already in the GATS agreement, Article 24. 14. 1.4. Okay. Article 1.4 of the GATS agreement says that there is no negotiations neither on this nor on culture. So, hands off. Huh? And was machen wir mit dem Lüftchen, damit es ein Sturm...
So what about this puff which we want to allow to build into a storm? This will only work if the European Parliament helps the Commission fan the flames or fan the winds of this storm.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Reding. We thank you. That'll be enough by now. And we move on to the second session we're having this evening, late at evening, in coincidence with the plenary. We thank you for your patience and cooperation. We wave goodbye to our Commissioner Reding. Thank you so much. Thank you. And without further ado, minding the timing, we move on to the second session, which concerns, by our invitation, Senator Arcadio Díaz-Tejera, member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe and rapporteur on its resolution 1954-2013 on national security and access to information. We expect Mr. Arcadio Díaz-Tejera to take the podium. Would you do it from there? Okay, that'll be okay. Then I suggest, if nobody minds, I suggest use the floor for the next maximum 10 minutes, and then we move on to a common round of questions and answers. The floor is yours.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I would just like to say that I was surprised that you asked a member of the Council of Europe to come to a meeting here. I was pleasantly surprised because a few days ago, during a day on the justice systems in Europe, we were talking about the magistrates, but there was no representative from the Court of Justice on human rights from Strasburg, which I thought was quite surprising, since we were talking about human rights. And secondly, I was surprised because you have the report which was presented to the plenary of the Council of Europe, and it was approved by 140 votes in favour and 2 opposed. It's available in French and English for anyone who wants to look at it. I have a copy of that on paper for those of you who haven't been able to see it on the web. The Council was particularly interested in participating in the previous debate, but given that I wasn't an MEP, I refrained from commenting in the previous discussion. But I was pleased to hear what the Commissioner said about unacceptable, because I think that's quite an appropriate expression. We're talking about a very serious subject here. The question is not just looking at how we act with our friends and families and our brothers on the other side of the Atlantic. No one questions that anymore. What we need to stress is that many of the complaints take place, in fact, between brothers in the family. I mean, there's a lot of court cases between family members, in fact, but what we need to do is look at things calmly and not appear pathetic or ridiculous. So, as you can see from the report, there's 24 pages, there are 13 suggestions, and there are 3 sections of issues that I want to stress here. One, in terms of prevention, detection, response and recovery, if there are situations of severe attack. Secondly, called culture of cybersecurity in companies and critical infrastructure, and how we can look at the concept of integrated security. And thirdly, the investigation and persecution for cyber criminals and cyber delinquency. There are 16 projects from 16 countries, plus the Budapest Convention, plus the Tajin Convention. So we're not lacking legal texts. It's a question of whoever controls this technology. They don't really care about how many legal texts there are. The facts are that here we're talking about massive electronic spying, which everyone has said is unacceptable, but we haven't got the data and the procedures in place so that it doesn't happen again, or to prevent this be prevented by the strength of technology and not just simply the limits of the guarantees. Well, what the problem is that if a child points at the moon and people are scandalized by saying that part of his finger is dirty, I mean, we're talking about something that's so serious that millions and millions of Europeans have been spied on, and the problem is whether someone has respect his single contract of confidentiality. I'm more concerned by that concept. I mean, that will be seen by the labor courts or whoever has to see that. But what's incredible is that no one clearly said that this is happening, and no one seems to be bothered by the fact that we should set up the mechanism to prevent this happening again. So despite Tallinn and Budapest and the 16 strategies on cybersecurity, all of this is still happening. I proposed a working line to fight against this and increase the capacity for investigating and combating cyber tourism. For 3 months, I was at a course in the National Defense Center, and I was sent to Israel. I was talking with people who are masters of this subject, and I can tell you that when we asked whether there were any limits, technologically speaking, there are no limits. It's like an onion. You can peel off a layer and another layer and another layer, but if you want to reach the heart of the information, you will get there. Any concept of limits or guarantees in the state of law is what's at stake here. Some of them at the course, they ask for authorization for the local authorities where the servers are located to carry out this type of spying. So in these 3 months of courses with NATO and Spanish officials, the final conclusion was that you can put up a lot of onion skins, but if this isn't taken seriously, you're still going to reach the heart of the information regardless, no matter what you put in the laws. So it's not just a question of our relations with our brothers across the Atlantic. I mean, we all have still a cordial relationship with them. That's not it. But rather, we have to pick up the limits and the concept of limits and guarantees and fundamental rights throughout Europe. What are the standards we have in terms of protection of privacy? That's what's at stake here. These are new challenges and there's new risks, but they're all linked to old concepts linked to the heart of human rights, individual beings. And that's what we're talking about. If we don't take this in serious, we're going to continue to play this minor role on the side, which is rather pathetic. I still haven't exceeded my 10 minutes, but I'll leave it for the debate, Chairman.
Gracias por la presentación.
Thank you for that very concise and direct presentation.
Of questions and answers, getting started by our rapporteur, Mr. Claude Moraes.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. And sorry it's sort of late evening Strasburg, although you're in Strasburg. Can I just kick off the debate by just getting into the way that you did in talking about legal texts and not being effective, and just first of all just depart from the script and just ask you what you feel about the Council of Europe's investigation into national surveillance. You have had something of an inquiry. You've looked at, for example, Article 52, and you've looked at the way ECHR can give you, the power that the General Secretary can ask Member States questions and all sorts of different methodologies that you could have in the Council of Europe. Obviously, you're not going to get answers to these questions. That's the the tone with which you've given us your 4 minutes, 5 minutes. So can you tell us what lessons you've learned from that you can give to us here in our inquiry? And really to focus on what Mrs. Intervelt was talking about in the last session, which is what is your sense of what is happening with the member states and the problem with member state intelligence agencies exceeding their powers or possibly colluding, and whether the Council of Europe is going to place pressure using its powers with the ECHR and so on to place those kinds of pressures on member states to come up with answers. Are you going to be using any of your powers to place any of those pressures on individual member states? That would be interesting to know. And have you begun to go through those processes? I've read some of the resolution on national security that you put together, but are you going to go heavy on this? So it would be really interesting to know exactly how far the Council of Europe is going to go on this. I mean, it's just interesting because, for example, in the CIA renditions report, I thought the Council of Europe was quite effective, and it's very much how the Council of Europe decides to place its emphasis. I think on the renditions issue, I think it was very effective, and it would be interesting to know how you decide to play this one politically and what lessons that may have for us.
Thank you, Mr. Moraes. Mr. Vos.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you. Taking up from what Claude Moraes said, I'd also be interested to know about to what extent you've been addressing the question of modern technology, because this to some extent undermines the law. How do you see the Patriot Act, which provides for extraterritorial effect of the legislation, and in general the legal and to some extent or more or less means that the legal recourse agreements we have no effect? And going beyond that, I'd ask the question of to what extent in our globalized, digitalized, networked world we're being confronted with a globalized secret service with connections being created that we ourselves can't check on. Or can you show us any ways of doing that?
Mrs. Sintvelde.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just a short question, really, because the resolution looks, I mean, I suppose I could agree to every single word, but I wonder, I'd be interested to know about the process for adopting it, because all the parliamentarians who have supported this, in many cases, come from member states who do not apply these principles. And some of those parliamentarians may actually come from government parties. So isn't there, I mean, this is great, but I wish they would apply it back home. And I won't single out any particular countries, but I'd like to know what the debate is like in the Council of Europe, and how the colleagues intend to apply this back home and make sure that their own governments adhere to these principles. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see Mr. Albrecht.
Thank you, Chair, and also thank you, Senator. I would like to ask two questions. One is on the work of the Spanish Senate on the scrutiny towards intelligence cooperation in Europe. So if you had debates on the question to work together with other national parliaments or to scrutinize the cooperation between your intelligence service and other European intelligence services and the rules which apply in this respect. And also Do you know about INCEN, which is existing on the European level, and do you scrutinize the work of your intelligence service there? And then one question with a different scope with regard to also one thing which is referenced in the resolution 1954, which is the protection of journalists, and the question in how far, for example, the Guardian journalists were obliged to hand over the material they got on these surveillance measures, and in how far these journalists and the freedom of press is safeguarded, because obviously in the United States journalists are better protected than in the UK and in Europe, obviously, and I would like to know how you see this problem. Thank you.
Albrecht and Frau Ernst.
Ja, vielen herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much for that report. What I'm interested in connection in the end with the NSA report, is the relationship between national security and what you, in your resolution, have referred to as public information. You know that national security tends to be a so-called killer argument, with which the information that exists is kept secret, so that there's no possibility of transparency. It's a big problem if you then want to address secret service programs or whatever. So could you perhaps tell us something more precise about how you and the Council of Europe agreed on this matter of national security? And also, something that we're very concerned about is the oversight of secret services. Could you tell us about how you address that? How should oversight bodies be set up? I've written down, but my colleague already mentioned that.
We've had a round of questions by the rapporteurs. Any other members? If not, if that's not the case, we shall close the second session by turning back to our guest speaker, Senador Arcadio Tejera.
Gracias, presidente.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, very quickly, but I do apologize to the interpreters, says the Speaker. I'll try to speak a little bit more slowly this time, says the Speaker. Well, let me start with the last one. We've been working on this report for 2 years. We've listened to experts working in national intelligence in different countries, from different legal systems, continental or Anglo-Saxon, current or former heads of intelligence services of different countries with different legal systems and cultures, so that no one could come up with an excuse of cultural uniqueness. Secondly, we had academic experts as well. Thirdly, we had many NGOs working on this, and they're the principle of the global principles of access to information and general security. All of this information is accessible. All this 2 years of work is available. Secondly, we stress something fundamental, and that is the general right to information. That's only limited as in an exceptional manner. What limits it? The law, with a restrictive or extensive interpretation. So the restrictive interpretation, well, who interprets the law? We think that the best is an independent authority. There are examples. For example, Spain, there's a magistrate from the Supreme Court, which sometimes says yes, sometimes says no. It's a bad thing to say always yes, or a bad thing to always say no. You have to evaluate and comment on it as specifically as possible about why yes or why no. We're 4 votes off from the 4 signatures off from the 47 countries belonging to the Council of Europe as a union of cooperation, different from the member states, which of the EU, which is an integration of 27 member states. we're missing 4 signatures to have everyone sign up to this. Now on the INSEE case, I don't have any information on that. I'm sorry, I can't. As you know, there are 2 types of speakers: those who know everything, and some of us that are human, and when we don't know everything, we say it. We admit to we don't know it. I'm sorry, I'll have to go find out about that. On protection of journalists, well, that is listed specifically, as you said, in one of the 13 proposals, because there is a 24-page text, and then there's a resolution. That's the 1954. I remember that because that's the year I was born. So I can remember that one. And there are 13 comments in that. The last question about this Spanish issue, the answer is no. Well, who carries this case forward? The Congress, in a specific committee on secrets. That is who is going to hear the report from the the director of the National Intelligence Authorities. Is there cooperation with other intelligence services? Yes. And sometimes there's even cooperation between the intelligence services, and that's something to think about. This is something to think about. Sometimes cooperation between intelligence services is a good thing or a bad thing, and has nothing to do with governments or the ideology of the parties of who's in governments. It has to do with subjective relationships that they establish amongst themselves, of passing information back and forth that they've had established for many years. Now, I've noted down coherence, but I've forgotten what the question was linked to that. I'm sorry about that. On the global principles, I commented on that already. The debate in substance is not the spying that we've discovered now because an individual has broken his contract. The basic debate should be on cyber criminality and cyber spying. If we're talking about security in the Council of Europe, there is a doctrine from a Spanish, a Swiss prosecutor who was working on this issue for years. And there are new reports that have been done since his work, and it's no longer a question of just access to information and national security, but rather the competence that the state has to investigate the private sphere of its citizens. I think it's a Dutch expert working on this now called Peter Homsey. The speaker apologizes for the pronunciation of the surname. That's what they're working on at the moment. And lastly, you commented on about the European Secret Services and the possibility of us working on that. Well, you here in the European Union would have to decide whether we're talking about a utopia or a nightmare. You'd have to sort that one out. I think up till now, the role we're playing is rather a pathetic one, to be quite honest. Because I mean, we approved our report by 140 votes and 2 against. But we keep saying we have to fight against terrorism, we have to fight against terrorism, and everyone say, well, we all agree that we have to fight against terrorism, but we don't want to behave like they are in the fight, without any sort of concept of limits, without any sort of guarantees. Ignoring the parliamentary procedure, ignoring the state of law, ignoring human rights of all of humanity. Because it's not true that they've spied for reasons of security and terrorism. No, I'm sorry, but when they were spying on the delegation to London, they were talking about commercial and trade issues. That had nothing to do with terrorism. And when the Italian colleagues said that these 45 million telephone data on the period where the Italian government was in crisis, I'm sorry, but that is not an issue that is linked to national security. It's a question of whoever has the technological power is using it. And anyone who doesn't have this technological power, either they access the technological power or they discuss things to see whether we can work on some that we can try to ensure are respected. And someone has got to ensure that this law is respected. It's not a question. It's not a bad thing to get angry once in a while. I mean, you often get angry at your siblings or your parents or your siblings, but the love is not gone if you get mad at them. I do apologize, Chairman, for going on at length, but I mean, I would like all of these ideas to be shared. Thank you very much. Given the difficult subject matter, it is coinciding with a plenary session, and it's not a terribly good time for this members, but also for the interpreters who have set timetable. I think we were planned to stop at 9.
Make specific points or questions in this second session this evening. If it's not the case, then back to you. Final word. Última palabra, por favor, senador Tejera.
Solo decirle, señor presidente, que me ha
Just to say that I was delighted that you were the one chairing this session. Someone might think it'd be a complicity between Canary Islanders, but that's wrong. I mean, I think it's like the rapporteur and the shadow rapporteur. I mean, I don't see it as a shadow rapporteur. No, what I wanted to say was that thank you very much for having invited me. I'm not disappointed there's not a lot of people. I mean, that's what happens in these things. But what I would like to say is one thing. Quite honestly, in the Parliamentary Assembly, there are 400 members of Parliament from 47 countries. Believe me, sometimes there are rather stupid debates, but sometimes there are extremely interesting debates. It's a laboratory of ideas, and it would be a good idea to use it more intensively, not just on this subject, but for many other subjects, because the responsibility of an integrated union is limited to that union. But the Council of Europe is a sort of laboratory of ideas, and perhaps with greater intensity of cooperation between the Council of Europe and the European Union, then you get beyond the limits of the European Parliament and you can come to the Council of Europe. I think if we work together more, I mean, we constantly call on people from the European Parliament. We do it as a perfectly normal occurrence. Sometimes you have to do that. Thank you very much. The LIBE Committee of Inquiry would like to thank Senator Tejera, who accepted to come here and provide his testimonial as the rapporteur of the special report from the Council of Europe. I would just like to react to this one request you've made, saying that the European Parliament does practice the institutional dialogue with the national parliaments and the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Every 6 months we have been having contact, and there's a strong political conviction from Europe about concentric circles. We've invited the commissioner, the European Commissioner for Human Rights. We had an extremely interesting discussion with them, the Commission for Venice, and the specialized rapporteur from the Parliamentary Assembly from the Council of Europe. I mean, I think that should clearly demonstrate our interest in having a dialogue with the Parliamentary Assembly. In any case, thank you very much indeed for coming. Chairman, I think we can do a lot better, however. Well, yes, indeed. That's why we're here. Thank you all very much indeed.
Next meeting, December 18th, from 9 to 12:30 in Brussels. Next LIBE Inquiry meeting, December 18th. Thank you. Thank you all for your cooperation.